and welcome to this episode of Adventures in Contracting. I am Leona Charles, CEO and founder of SPC Business Consulting, where we do all things government contracts.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Vivica Brooks, and I am the founder and president of TBG Trains, and we are workforce development professionals and helping people reach their wow. That means the world of work.
All right. So you can find our episodes on SoundCloud at Adventures in Contracting, on our website at spcconsulting.org, or you can follow us, send us messages and comments on any of our social media accounts. Facebook, we're at Adventures in Contracting, as well as LinkedIn. We are also on Twitter at contracting_in, or you could just send us an email at podcast at adventuresincontracting.info. So this this morning's episode is something that is kind of near and dear to my heart, only because it was done under the guise of being in the best interest of small business, and that has proven to not be true. So I sent you this article from Federal News Network, and I'll be sure to put the links down in the description of everything. But the gist of this article is it talks about category management, and what that means in
Mhm.
government contracting. So, category management is it's the okay, so the literal definition is the business practice of buying common goods and services as an enterprise to eliminate redundancies, increase efficiency, and deliver more savings, which is government speak for big box. And I, I want to
Okay.
buy it all in one place. Um,
Okay.
what that means to small businesses is, I think, some things that are really obvious and some things that are not. One, it's small businesses understand that we don't typically get the volume discount in anything, because as a small business, we don't have the numbers to necessitate a volume discount, right?
Hmm.
And also, I think it's very rare that you will see a small business that can do everything, right? We're not a one-stop shop
Hmm.
as a small business typically. So here comes category management, and it's so funny because it came off of an equally terrible ideal. The whole reason category management came about was because the DoD like to have they like to review contract awards based on lowest price technically acceptable, which is, we've
Okay.
discussed before, is a terrible way to award contracts, because it's basically buying the cheapest thing and you get what you pay for, right? So the government would typically spend 2 or 3 times the award amount because they'd have to have someone come in and fix. So LPTA went away finally, and everybody was like, "Yay, this is great. It's gone. It was terrible." But then they replaced it with something equally bad, like category management. So,
Okay. So wait, let me ask you real quick, Leona, because this is I know your total wheelhouse and your passion, your thing, right? And so for those who don't know, or like myself, just a very foundational piece of being exposed to category management. So category management, like you said, is kind of like you said, the federal government's answer to one-stop
yeah.
shopping. So if we need to buy widgets and screws and hammers, we're just going to get it from one person or one
Right.
company,
Well,
right?
in the government sense, it's we're gonna buy it from one contract. So instead of us having 15 contracts with a bunch
Uh-huh.
of little people, we're gonna buy it off of one
Okay.
contract.
Okay. And then this came about, you said, from DOD,
Mhm.
and you gave us another acronym
Sorry.
there.
LPTA, yeah,
LPTA.
which was lowest price,
Okay.
technically acceptable. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
I'll put all of that in the description because you're flinging acronyms over here.
Yes. Okay. And so they did that because they were like, okay, we want to look for the lowest price. We want to do one stop shopping. But where the disadvantage to small business comes in is, like you said, it's harder for, because we can't necessarily buy things from volume discount,
Mhm.
then it's hard for us to go in as LPTA,
Right.
lowest price technical,
Technically acceptable, right. So
technically
here's the
acceptable.
thing. I think it really came from a good place because the argument is
Mhm.
instead of the government spending, millions and millions of dollars buying individual widgets from kind of like these boutique small businesses that only do this one thing and may only produce one part of the entire whole that we need. Why don't we just have this one contract where, everybody could bid and then we'll get qualified bidders and then they'll put in task order requests, you know, whenever we need to buy something. We'll put it out and they'll send a proposal for that and we'll select from this pre-qualified list of bidders. Which in theory,
Okay.
right? In theory, from a contract management perspective, from a project management perspective, it makes sense, right? Because instead of you now having to go and find 15 individual companies, you can just go to this list and this is this list of people that are able to bid on this award. This is what they do. They've already been vetted. We already have checked their past performance. They're capable of doing it. So on face
Mhm.
value, it makes sense, right? But the problem
Okay.
is in reality, it really decreases competition because what
Mm.
we know as small businesses, right, is that every now and then you find a diamond in the rough, right? You find someone who is small, but they're like totally capable. They know all of this stuff and you're like, "Oh my god, where has this person been forever?" Well, you don't know about them because they don't have $1 million in sales, right? They don't have 40 people, they don't have a marketing department. They're under the radar because they actually are really good at what they do. So they don't spend a whole lot
Mhm.
of time marketing and doing the glossy, trade shows where they pop up that cost like $5,000 to attend. They're just like, "No, no, we'll just, we'll tend to our customers and do
Mhm.
what we do." So, what has happened, I think, is the government has found that it's one really hard to get any type of uh innovation from these contracts, and it's really hard to continue to meet that small business goal, which even though they've kind of consolidated everything, they're still required to meet those small business goals and those set aside goals. And they're finding that it's really hard to do that. And it's hard because take for example, do you remember when we kind of
Mhm.
bid on that HCATS uh solicitation and it required that you have like $1 million in sales at least or and you have I forget what all the qualifications were, but so please don't get mad at me if I misremember it, but something like you had to have uh every partner on the team had to have at least 3 instances of past performance with a agency of similar size and scope. And this is where they lose small businesses, right?
Mhm.
The government is still hanging on to this ideal that if you've not worked with a large, 1,500 to 5,000 person agency, you don't have any idea how to do the work, which in this day and
Mm.
age is just stupid. But this is what they're hanging on to because for so long, government contracting was the big 5 consulting firms charging outrageous, hourly rates to create strategic plans. And for so long, they were embedded in government agencies that the industrial complex really does run off of firms putting bodies in the seats in government agencies. That's just kind of how they grow. What the government is understanding now is that that's a good way to keep the industry afloat, but it's a terrible way to run the government, right? Because it's costly, it's not effective because the
Mhm.
contractors are contractors, they're not government people, there are limitations to what they can do. And if we buy software for them, it's proprietary, right? So the government is now understanding, oh, we've got to do all this data rights stuff, we've got to negotiate licensing and things like that because technology is moving much, much faster than government and regulations and contracts. And the ideal and I will say that this pandemic, one of the good things that has come out of it is that the government has understood that there does not need to be bodies in the seats to make something work. And
Oh,
that
okay.
is something that I honestly thought I had never seen in my lifetime. because the government's just so
Okay.
used to having you flesh out how many people are on your team and you need 15 people. As small
Mhm.
businesses, we
Mhm.
understand you don't need 15 people. You might need, 2 or 3 that just really know what they're doing, and then, somebody
Mhm.
to run it. And now the government is understanding this. So I would say
So that's a bonus that's come out of
it's a
this.
bonus that's come out of this
That
terrible
could
strategy.
possibly be right. So that could be something that a small business could use to their advantage.
Yeah.
Because even when you're talking about, less payroll, and then going back to the whole thing about
Mhm.
LPTA and being able to now go in and offer it at a lower cost because you don't have all of these overhead
And
expenses.
that and so
So do you think?
that's important. I wanna
Mhm.
stop you right there. That is the big thing,
Okay.
that overhead cost, right? So
Hmm.
that is the biggest thing that really trips people up with contracts because I say it all the time, contracts is not a place to start. It's a place to end up, but it's not a place to start because it's expensive.
Hmm.
Why is it expensive? That what you said, that overhead. The cost of performing on a contract more often than not is at least half the cost of the contract award. So, if you get $1,000,000 award, you should plan right off the bat, 500,000 of that is gonna be for your insurance, it's gonna be for your staff, it's gonna be for
Hmm.
um, your licensing of software, for your physical hardware, all of these things that you're gonna need to just run that contract. So,
Hmm.
with the pandemic, we've learned we don't necessarily need all of that stuff, which is a great
Hmm.
thing, particularly for small businesses. Because I think
Hmm.
and you and I know we've lived in this space a long time. We've been doing video conferencing and remote work for years. Like, this is not I think if anybody was really ready for the pandemic, it was small businesses, right? The large businesses were the ones that were kind of, like, scrambling and going, "Oh my god, how do I use Zoom?" And, we've been doing it for years. We've been meeting on Teams because smaller businesses have people that are located all over the country, and we come together to write proposals and to do projects, but big businesses don't. So the government is now in a position to saying, "Okay, we see that we can save money not having people in the office, but how do we pivot?" Their
Hmm.
solution
Right.
is leaning
Hmm.
heavily towards this category management, right?
Okay. And that I think is the key, right? So we through our discussion we've been able to really see how a small business could use this to its advantage because when we were just sitting speaking, I thought about, the
Mhm.
Titanic comes to my mind,
Yeah.
right? Because you've got these large companies who now have to pivot and you've got to turn from the iceberg where as a small business, we're in our little dinghies, we're like, yay, okay, whoosh, and we've turned. So I think that's something that we as small businesses can and should use to our advantage, which leads me to my next question for you, Leona, is with this category management, right? With this category management system, how can a small business get on that list? Because you had mentioned earlier, they have this list of companies, they've been vetted. So how is it that we can use our ability to adapt and pivot quickly to get on this list so that we can participate in
Yeah.
category
So
management?
this is a great question, and it's a double-edged sword, but because we are entrepreneurs, I am gonna err on the side of optimism, right? The way to do
Okay.
this is you need to team, right? You have to because these category management things are based on government-wide acquisition contracts, which you will hear people throw around and they call them GWACs or they call them MACs, which is a multiple acquisition contract. And all that means is I'm gonna take everything that I need and I'm gonna throw it in this one contract. And for you to be able to tell me that you sell this stuff,
Mm,
you have to make the list of these pre-qualified bidders. And if you aren't
okay.
awarded a spot on this contract, you can't even send a proposal in. You can't call and say, "Hey, I really want to supply you with this. I see that you do this." They're like, "Oh, that's great. Are you an awardee?" And if you're not, then I mean, they're like, "That's great that you do that, but I can't award you anything off of this contract." So,
And when you're saying an awardee, there's steps that you have to take before you're even talking about the contract
yes.
award.
So you have to put in a proposal. You have to bid. You have to win on that proposal just to win a spot on that contract to be able to then supply another proposal to possibly win an actual award, right? So,
Okay, so let me ask you. We're gonna kind of this is a really educational podcast today. So you thought you were just gonna do your usual passion rant, right? so with that, with being able to go through and to really break it down, because I do think that is some of do as part of unpulling back the veil of the mysteries of government
yeah.
contracting is to really understand, because we throw out that word awardee, and in the real world award means I won,
Right, right.
right? But in government contracting, it just means, okay, you did the first hurdle. Now there's like 10 more hurdles. Keep running, keep going. And so I think it's important for small businesses to understand and to get a sense of that. So you mentioned two things. You said a GWAC,
Yeah. Yep,
right? Government wide acquisition
yep.
contract. Okay. And then you said the MAC. I'm sorry. Say it one,
Yeah, no,
what was
you're
it? The
right, the
acronym?
MAC, it's a multiple award
The MAC.
contract.
And how do those differ from the GSA?
Well, they don't. So the a
Okay.
GSA schedule is actually it's a GWAC. It's a government-wide acquisition contract, which means anyone in the government, even state governments, because DC, particularly DGS, loves to use GSA schedules. Um,
Okay.
Anyone in the government can purchase off of a GWAC, which is the beauty of it. And I think it's a wonderful vehicle. I'm not at all bashing GWACs. I think they're really good and useful. But um the problem is that first hurdle you talked about. If you don't make that first hurdle, then you're locked
Mm-hmm.
out of all of this business, right? And they can
Mm-hmm.
only talk to the people that are awarded, which narrows the competitive field, which is the whole point of a competitive contract, right? That's the whole point. And that's
Yes.
the whole reason why small businesses are getting courted by all these government agencies. So you have to ask yourself, what is the point of being courted and kind of being, asked out to bid on this project if I can't meet these initial hurdles to even get a place onto this contract vehicle to then bid and make some money?
And how does that, or does it differ or relate to the category management strategy the government is has put in
I
place?
mean, it's the same. It Okay, I'm gonna say this is a completely gospel, Leona. It it is a slight evolution, but I don't see it as a huge one because the government's take has always been, let's do things that are gonna provide the quickest, easiest return for us, right? And you and I both know as a small business, sometimes there's no quick, easy. Sometimes it's just the right way to do it, right? And when you do it the
Mm-hmm.
right way, then the quick and easy stuff, it manifests itself. But the government is about how can I get the most bang for my buck the quickest? And
Mm-hmm.
when you're dealing in business and you're dealing in contracts that typically take 5 years to do, that is not always the best thing to it's just not always the best thing because you need at least a year to figure out if it's working, right? And the government wants kind of automatic results. They wanna cut costs, they wanna cut expenses, cut the revenue of businesses. They're making too much money, and that's fine, whatever, I get it, but if you want good work, you've gotta come to the table and have a conversation, and the government is not always trying to hear that. They kind of wanna hear, "I can do this for $50,000 cheaper than the previous guy, but at the same quality," and you and I know as a small business, if I'm quoting you $50,000 less, there's gonna be an effect to the quality that you're receiving, hands down. There
Mm-hmm.
just isn't any way. So, I will say that, you know, it has some merits. Basically, it's not a good idea for small business because 'cause we're left running and chasing behind everything that's happening. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but, you know, it is what it is.
Okay. And so I think It kind of leads me to my next question, who's in the article you're going to post for everyone from Federal News
Mhm.
Network. And I, some of the numbers, when you sent this to me, I kind of was like, oh, wow, that's, some of these numbers were a little bit
Yeah.
alarming, right? So I see in the article since 2017, small businesses showed a 24% fall. As a result of, and this is a report from the Women's Chamber of Commerce. And so when they went to category management, it's led to a drop in the number of small business vendors participating even in government contracting. And so for women owned suppliers, it dropped by more than 22%. And then for veteran owned suppliers, dipped more than 17%. So, what is the suggestion now that we're aware of category management, how it's used, why it was implemented and put in place? How would you suggest that small business owners um, navigate this terrain?
So I think that's an interesting question, and it's an important question, and I don't know that there's an easy answer to it because we're always going to have to swim upstream against the big guys. That's just kind of a given, right? And I think as small businesses,
Mhm.
it's up to us to figure out, do we need to team? Do we need to do joint ventures? What is the best solution to get all of these requirements on the government side? It is gonna be an ongoing battle with them to recognize that the old way is not the best way, right? And always going to these huge brick and mortar people is not the way to get the most innovative products, and also it's not cost effective, right? Because when you go to these big guys,
Mhm.
you're getting this huge amount of overhead that you're paying for too. Smaller guys can give you what you're looking for. They're more nimble, which is what the government needs in this day and age with the way technology is moving. They're more up to date on the technology in the marketplace in our industries. Like we're not holding on to old technology because we can't afford to. We're too small. We've got to be able to react quickly. And so it's going to be this, I think, forever converging road of the government understanding that the way they've always done business is no longer working. And these kind of arbitrary guidelines that they're setting are really reducing their ability to meet their mission requirements. And small business has to understand though that you can't always ask the customer to come to your door. You have to do things that get
Mhm.
you to the customer's table, you know? And
Yeah,
yeah,
partnership.
it has to be a partnership. It can no longer be, I'm selling you this, if you want to just buy it, right? And leave me alone. It has to be, what are they doing? This is how we can help them do it. Come meet me. Let's talk about this. And the government has to say, oh, look,
Mm.
they're doing some things that look interesting to me. Let me leave my big, $70 billion defense contractor and let me go talk to the small
Mhm.
guy and see what they're doing and see how I can harness that information. So I will be interested to see what happens in the world of GUX. I will be interesting to see what happens in category management. But I think this is probably a topic that is far from over. And I am really, really interested to see how both sides kind of pivot to make this
Mhm.
work. Um, but I think my takeaway from this is your comment on overhead and
Mhm.
how people just don't really understand how big of a hurdle that is in government contracts, and that's on both sides. So that will be my biggest takeaway from today's episode.
Cool. And then my biggest takeaway was just, those numbers that we
Mhm.
saw, and how it can it was put in place definitely to drive efficiency, but how government and small businesses, how we both need to come to the table and really form a partnership so that we can put in place things that are beneficial to both. Because at the end of the day, I think that's what everyone is looking for, a positive
Yeah.
outcome.
Yeah. It's all right, guys. Well, we want to leave you on a good note this morning. This was a great
Yes.
conversation. Um, Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.